Sacrilegious, a tale of impossible conception. When Amara discovers she's pregnant without ever being intimate, she's left grappling with the impossible. But as her mother, Tamara, begins showing the same symptoms, the chilling revelation unravels, a secret so unimaginable, it will shake the very fabric of their reality and force them to confront a force neither science nor logic can explain. Amara awoke to the first rays of sunlight streaming through her window, but instead of her usual burst of energy, she felt an inexplicable heaviness in her limbs. It wasn't just exhaustion, it was as though her body was quietly protesting every movement. She brushed it off, blaming the late nights she'd spent preparing for her upcoming work presentation. But as she stood in the shower, a wave of nausea hit her so suddenly that she had to grip the tiled wall for support. "Maybe I ate something bad," she muttered to herself, though she couldn't recall anything unusual about her dinner the previous night. As the day unfolded, Amara began noticing peculiar things about herself. Her morning coffee, once her cherished ritual, now smelled overwhelmingly bitter, making her stomach churn. She pushed the mug away and instead reached for a glass of water. Even that felt oddly metallic on her tongue. Her colleagues at work noticed her unusual demeanor. "You look tired, Amara. Are you feeling okay?" Sarah asked during their lunch break. Amara forced a smile, unwilling to admit how drained she felt. She hadn't even touched the sandwich she brought, the thought of it inexplicably unappetizing. By the time she returned home, her body begged for rest. As she slipped off her bra, she winced at the tenderness in her breasts. It was a discomfort she hadn't felt before, and it left her puzzled. Dismissing it as a sign of an impending period, she curled into bed, trying to shake off her growing unease. The next few days brought more changes. Amara began waking up at odd hours of the night to use the bathroom, her bladder seemingly incapable of holding its usual capacity. Her favorite perfume, the one she'd worn for years, now seemed cloyingly strong. Then there were the cravings. She found herself standing in the kitchen at midnight, dipping pickles into peanut butter with a strange sense of satisfaction. "This is ridiculous," she laughed to herself, but the odd pairing felt like the most natural thing in the world at that moment. Despite the humor in her midnight snacks, Amara couldn't ignore the emotional rollercoaster she was on. She found herself tearing up over a commercial featuring a baby laughing, her heart swelling with an inexplicable tenderness. The next moment, she'd be snapping at her best friend over a minor comment, only to apologize profusely minutes later. "Amara, are you sure you're okay?" her friend Mira asked over coffee one afternoon. "You've been different lately." Amara hesitated, finally voicing the thought she'd been suppressing. "I don't know, Mira. My body feels different. Everything feels off." Myra's eyes widened slightly. "When was your last period?" The question hit Amara like a jolt. She mentally counted back, her breath catching in her throat as realization dawned. I think it's been over a month," she whispered. The next morning, unable to wait any longer, Amara bought a pregnancy test. Her hands trembled as she held the small plastic stick, watching the seconds tick by on the clock. When the result appeared, a mixture of emotions washed over her. Joy, fear, confusion, and an undeniable sense of awe all collided in her chest. She was pregnant. But as the initial shock settled, another thought pierced through her mind like ice. She couldn't remember being intimate with any man in the past months who could have caused this pregnancy. A wave of confusion and panic surged through her, leaving her breathless. Amara sank onto the bathroom floor, clutching the test in her hands. Her mind raced, desperately searching for answers. "How is this possible?" she whispered, her voice trembling. Her emotions swirled in a chaotic storm. Fear gripped her chest, cold and unrelenting. Was this some kind of medical anomaly? Had she forgotten something crucial, or was there another explanation, one she couldn't yet comprehend? She felt an inexplicable sense of vulnerability, as if her body had betrayed her by harboring a secret she hadn't agreed to. Tears streamed down her face as questions flooded her mind. Was she losing her grip on reality? What would she tell Mira, her family, her colleagues? How could she explain a pregnancy that defied logic? Amara's hands trembled as she placed the test on the counter. The room felt smaller, the walls closing in around her. Her reflection in the mirror was pale, her wide eyes filled with both terror and wonder. And yet, beneath the confusion and fear, there was a tiny spark of something else, an unspoken connection to the life growing within her. Her world had unraveled in an instant, and Amara knew she was standing at the edge of a mystery she couldn't ignore. Somehow, she would have to find answers. But for now, she was left with only her reflection, the test, and the overwhelming realization that her life would never be the same. Before Amara could fully process the inexplicable situation she found herself in, her mother, Tamara, began to experience similar symptoms. It started subtly: complaints about nausea in the morning, a heightened sensitivity to smells, and a newfound aversion to her favorite herbal tea. Amara noticed Tamara's fatigue, the way she'd sit down after even the lightest household chores, her face pale and drawn. "Mom, are you feeling all right?" Amara asked one afternoon, concerned by how often Tamara had been retreating to her bedroom lately. Tamara sighed, rubbing her temples. "I don't know, sweetheart. I've been feeling so off. The nausea, the tiredness. And these cravings. Yesterday, I found myself eating crackers with jam and hot sauce. It's ridiculous." Amara froze. Her mind raced as she processed her mother's words. The symptoms were eerily similar to her own: the nausea, the cravings, the fatigue. A chill ran down her spine as a thought she couldn't ignore began to take shape. "Mom, when was your last, period?" Amara asked hesitantly. Tamara looked at her daughter, her brow furrowing in confusion. "Amara, I'm 46. I haven't had one in years." I thought all of this might be some strange menopausal thing, but her voice trailed off, her expression growing distant. Then, as if something clicked, she whispered, "Amara, do you think?" The unspoken question hung heavy in the air between them. Neither wanted to say it out loud, but the possibility loomed. Tamara's hand instinctively went to her abdomen, her eyes wide with disbelief. "That's impossible," Tamara finally said, shaking her head. "I haven't. I mean, I haven't been intimate with anyone in years." Amara's heart pounded in her chest. The room seemed to close in around them as mother and daughter stared at each other, both grappling with the sheer impossibility of their shared circumstances. The silence was thick, broken only by the sound of Tamara's shallow breathing. "Mom," Amara began, her voice trembling, "what's happening to us?" Tamara could only shake her head, her hands trembling as she reached for her daughter. Together, they sat in the dimly lit room, united in their confusion and fear. The mystery of their circumstances was deepening, and neither could shake the feeling that they were on the precipice of something far beyond their understanding. Tamara's distant gaze lingered on the walls as if they could offer an answer to the puzzle now consuming both her and her daughter. Her mind drifted to a past she had tried so hard to bury, one that felt far too cruel to unearth again. But the uncanny parallel between her current symptoms and Amara's pushed her to confront memories long locked away. Tamara's life had been marked by tragedy from an early age. At just 5 years old, her parents had died in a horrific car accident, leaving her orphaned and vulnerable. She was sent to live with her maternal uncle, Gabi, a man her mother had trusted with everything. Initially, Gabi provided her with a semblance of family, but as Tamara grew older, his kindness morphed into something monstrous. When she turned 12, Gabi began to prey on her innocence. The first time it happened, Tamara had frozen in shock, unable to comprehend what was unfolding. "If you ever speak a word of this," he had snarled after, "I will kill you." The threat sank into her bones, and with no one to turn to, she endured his abuse in silence. For 2 agonizing years, Tamara lived in a nightmare. Her body became a battleground for his depravity, and her spirit withered under the weight of his control. At 14, she discovered she was pregnant. The realization filled her with both dread and a flicker of hope. Perhaps this would finally bring an end to her torment. But before the pregnancy could become visible, Gabi fled, abandoning her to bear the shame and responsibility alone. Tamara gave birth to a baby girl she named Amara. The child became her beacon of light in an otherwise dark world. Though society's judgment weighed heavily on her, Tamara pressed forward, determined to give her daughter a better life. Years later, at 25, she married Daniel, a man she believed would bring stability and love into their lives. For a time, it seemed she had found peace. But despite their efforts, Tamara was unable to conceive again. The pain of infertility mingled with the scars of her past, leaving her feeling incomplete. Amara grew into a bright and determined young woman, but tragedy struck again when she was in senior high school. One fateful day, she returned home to find herself alone with Daniel. Offering her a drink, Daniel laced it with a sedative. Minutes later, Amara felt her body weaken, and before she could fully grasp what was happening, Daniel took advantage of her vulnerability. The aftermath of the assault shattered their family. Amara, only 16 at the time, discovered she was pregnant. When she confided in her mother, Tamara was overcome with a mixture of fury, guilt, and heartbreak. She confronted Daniel, throwing him out of their home and filing for divorce. Tamara was left to pick up the pieces of their lives once again, supporting Amara as she gave birth to her son, Gordon. Now, as Tamara sat beside Amara in the dimly lit room, the weight of their shared trauma pressed down on her like a suffocating blanket. The symptoms they both experienced, the nausea, the cravings, the fatigue, felt like cruel echoes of their pasts. But the most shocking aspect of their current predicament was the impossibility of it all. Tamara hadn't been intimate with anyone in years, and yet the signs of pregnancy were unmistakable. "Mom," Amara whispered, her voice trembling. What if this isn't normal? What if something else is happening to us?" Tamara looked at her daughter, her face pale and drawn. The question lingered in the air like a shadow, dark and unrelenting. She wanted to offer reassurance, to say that everything would be fine, but the words wouldn't come. Deep down, she knew that whatever was happening to them defied logic and reason. "Amara," Tamara finally said, her voice barely above a whisper, "I don't know what's happening. But we are in this together." The two women clung to each other, their shared fear and confusion binding them tighter than ever. Somewhere in the recesses of their history, an answer awaited. But for now, all they had was each other and the chilling realization that their lives were unraveling in ways they could never have imagined. Despite their shared confusion, life had to go on. Amara and Tamara attempted to push through their days, keeping their inexplicable conditions a secret from the world. Yet, the growing symptoms became harder to ignore. They avoided discussing the possibility of their pregnancies with anyone outside their small circle, even as their bodies began to betray them, subtle changes, unspoken truths that neither could make sense of. Meanwhile, Gordon, Amara's 16-year-old son, was navigating his own path, though one shrouded in secrecy and danger. At home, he was the picture of calm, a quiet and reserved teenager who seldom caused trouble. But outside the confines of their house, Gordon was someone entirely different. In school, he had fallen in with a crowd known for their rebellious and reckless behavior. What started as harmless pranks soon escalated into petty crimes, and by the time he entered senior high school, Gordon had begun dabbling in the dangerous world of local gangs. He sought thrills, power, and a sense of belonging. But his ambitions took a dark turn when he was introduced to a man known only as Baba, a mysterious figure who claimed to hold the keys to power and invincibility. Baba offered Gordon something irresistible, a charm. The older man explained that this charm would grant him control over anyone he desired. It was a simple object wrapped in dark cloth and tied with red string, but Baba's words were laced with warnings. "This power is not for the weak," he said, his eyes boring into Gordon's. "It will take as much as it gives. Use it wisely, or you will suffer consequences beyond your comprehension." Gordon, blinded by his desire for dominance, ignored the cryptic warning. He began using the charm to manipulate others, his confidence growing with each success. But his greed knew no bounds, and soon he turned its power toward his own family. It started subtly. One evening, Gordon stood in the doorway of the living room watching his mother and grandmother talk. They were his family, yet in his twisted mind, they became symbols of control he had yet to assert. Using the charm, he cast an influence over them, an unspoken command that left them vulnerable to his will. Unbeknownst to them, Amara and Tamara's inexplicable pregnancies were the result of Gordon's actions. Under the influence of the charm, he had violated the sacred bond of their family, leaving both women oblivious to the truth. They were left only with their confusion, their bodies carrying the consequences of an evil they couldn't yet comprehend. The truth began unraveling one fateful evening when Amara, unable to sleep, wandered into Gordon's room to retrieve a book he had borrowed. As she reached for the bookshelf, a small, dark-wrapped object caught her attention. Intrigued, she unwrapped it, only to find herself recoiling at the ominous sight of the charm. At that moment, Gordon entered the room. His usually calm demeanor faltered as his eyes locked onto the unwrapped charm in his mother's hands. Panic flashed across his face, quickly replaced by anger. "Where did you find that?" he demanded, his voice sharp. Amara's heart raced as she held the object between them. "Gordon, what is this? Why does it feel wrong?" Before he could answer, Tamara appeared in the doorway, drawn by the raised voices. Her eyes darted between Amara, Gordon, and the charm. The air was thick with tension, and a horrifying realization began to take root in Tamara's mind. "Gordon," Tamara whispered, her voice trembling. "What have you done?" Cornered, Gordon's facade crumbled. He admitted to his involvement with the charm, his gang activities, and, finally, the horrifying truth of what he had done to his own family. His words came tumbling out, each one a dagger to the hearts of the two women standing before him. Amara and Tamara were frozen in disbelief, their minds struggling to process the enormity of his betrayal. The revelation shattered whatever innocence remained in their perception of Gordon. The boy they had loved and nurtured had become the architect of their shared nightmare. The days that followed were a blur of grief and anger. Amara and Tamara reported Gordon's actions to the authorities, knowing that justice had to be served, even if it meant losing him forever. The charm was destroyed, its power extinguished, but the scars it had left would linger. Gordon was sentenced to a juvenile correction facility, his future forever tainted by his choices. For Amara and Tamara, the road to healing was long and arduous. They leaned on each other, their bond strengthened by their shared pain. Together, they vowed to rise above the darkness that had consumed their lives, determined to rebuild and find light in the ruins of their shattered world. In the end, their story became a cautionary tale, a reminder of the destructive power of unchecked ambition and the resilience of the human spirit in the face of unimaginable betrayal.